Welcome back to another video, welcome back to another week, welcome to my channel, welcome to your cozy book corner of the internet. You may notice, I don't know if there's like a real difference in my filming, but I've moved my filming situation to a different room, which was a task to do on my own, but we did it. Happy Mardi Gras week. It is currently Mardi Gras week here in Sydney, Australia. So I thought in celebration of that, I would talk about some of my favorite LGBTQI+ books that I have read and loved, and that I think you should read and also love. In honor of Mardi Gras, I thought I would, get my boobs out on the internet. Well, I mean, I'm wearing a bra, but at the moment I'm not monetized and we don't have to worry about things like boobs out on the internet. So I figured, why not? I also didn't think about the fact that the room upstairs where I've moved my filming situation is so hot. So if I look like I've got really good highlighter on, I don't, it's sweat. Let's just get into it because I'm uncomfortable. This is just a little aside from editing me. So I've been editing this video and I just wanted to make it clear that I have been using the phrase queer kind of interchangeably to mean LGBTQI+, just because it's easier to get my mouth around queer than it is to say LGBTQI+ 17 million times. So I just wanted to say that. Anyway, enjoy the video. So the first book I want to talk about is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Now, I want to preface this by saying I tried to read this book in 2023 and hated it. I gave it like a 2 out of 5 stars. Maybe, I don't even think I finished it. I DNF'd it and gave it a 2 out of 5. I recently decided I would give this one another go and I loved it. So I want to give you a piece of advice that I wish someone had given me. This is not a horror novel. This is not a horror novel. Do not go into this thinking that it's going to be some undersea kraken horror adventure. It's not. It's not a horror novel. What it is a gorgeous meditation on queer love and watching that love disappear in front of your eyes and being powerless to do anything about it. So Our Wives Under the Sea tells the story of Leah and Mary, who are a queer couple who have been together for some time. Leah is a marine biologist who is going down in a submarine for a short mission to survey one of the deepest parts of the ocean. As the craft is going down, they lose all control of the craft and contact with the surface, and they are stuck on the bottom of the ocean for a long period of time. We also get the perspective of her partner Miri, who we sort of flash back and forth between past tense and present tense. In present tense, Leah has returned from her mission after being gone for several months with what was supposed to be a several-week trip. And she has changed a lot. She's not different, she's acting weird, and Miri is trying to deal with the fallout of that. We also get flashbacks into the past where we see their love and burgeoning relationship grow, and the beauty in the banality and normalcy of their life together. I had this pitched to me as a sort of under the sea horror novel, and I think that's why I went into it and really didn't enjoy it, because it's not that. It is classic, no plot just vibes, literary fiction. It talks about, I think it would be a beautiful metaphor for losing someone you love to a degenerative sort of illness. Just the meditations on love and having to let go of someone and having to remove your own selfish desires when it comes to something like that. It's absolutely stunning, and I would so encourage you to read it going into it with that mindset rather than thinking it's going to be a horror novel, because I think if you go into it with that mindset, you will be sorely disappointed. My next pick is Big Swiss by Jen Began. I have talked about this book at length on this channel before, but we gotta get in some sapphic love stories where we can. So we are talking about our main character Greta, who is a transcriptionist who works for a weird enigmatic sex therapist called She is transcribing his sessions so he can turn them into a book. One night while transcribing a session, she becomes enamored with one of Om's patients that she calls Big Swiss, who has never had an orgasm and who has suffered through a horrific sexual assault. A little later on in the book, Greta and Big Swiss actually have a chance run-in at the dog park, and they start a conversation, and Greta realizes from her voice that this is the person that she's become enamored through listening to her story. They begin like a torrid affair and chaos ensues. Big Swiss is messy, chaotic, fun. It's a great tale, I think, of how trauma affects and shapes our lives without being too heavy. Like, both the characters in this book have gone through some pretty heavy duty, awful things, but at no point do I think the book makes it trauma porn-esque, which again I feel like is a very common theme, especially with books that deal with queer love. It often focuses on the horrendous side of it, which I do understand and recognize is a very, very real part of what it is to be a queer couple. But I also think and love reading about stories where it's not necessarily the two of them against the world. It's just like the two of them being chaos and messy and silly and stupid together. All of the characters in this book, I would say, very much borderline on being caricatures, but I think Jen Began does such a great job of writing characters who are unique and silly and kind of that manic pixie dream girl without actually stepping into the territory of being so ridiculous that they're annoying. I think this definitely has some elements of like fantastical bits where you're not really sure if what you're reading is reality or like a perceived thing happening in the character's mind, but I just think this is so funny. It's so dry. It deals with some pretty full-on topics, as I said, without getting into like trauma porn territory. I literally just had to get up and put a like dishcloth on the stool I'm sitting on because my butt is sweating so much. Summer in Australia is not for the faint-hearted, let me tell you that. The next book I want to talk about is Perfume and Pain by Anna Dawn, another one that, I'll be so real, I have talked at length about on this channel. So this book is about our main character Astrid, who is a sapphic novelist who has gotten into some hot water with her publisher and with her fans for making some really questionable remarks at a book signing. Astrid has sort of taken herself away from the public eye. She's moved to a new bungalow in LA to try and kind of give herself a fresh start. She is working on battling her drug addiction, writing her new novel, and working with a very famous Hollywood actress who is adapting one of her most popular books into a film. I love the fact that I think from memory there are literally 2 male characters in this whole book, and they serve as like the quirky, twinky, gay friends rather than as main characters. This book centers around women. It centers around women and their issues, women and their relationships, women being messy, women being chaotic. I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs. This is just such a funny book, and I think it has some really important things to say about, like, I often think in books that represent queer characters, they are often, I don't know if this is a word, but like halo-fied. They're really portrayed as good people purely through their queerness. Do they become better than their cis or straight counterparts? I love the fact that this book isn't afraid to shy away from the fact, also I'm so sorry for the state of my nails. I love the fact that this book isn't scared to shy away from the fact that queer people are just people, and we can be assholes, and we can be selfish, and we can be terrible, and Astrid is all of those things. I think she is a stereotypical narcissist, but at the same time you're kind of rooting for her and kind of love her. I also think this has some really great things to say about when is it like who gets to say what. We have as a society recently realized the power of language and the power of slurs and the power of saying horrible things to other people. And so I think this book has some really interesting questions about who is allowed to say what, who gets to decide who is allowed to say what, and where the line is when things are used in jest or humor. Perfume and Pain by Anna Dawn. Highly, highly, highly recommend. The next book I want to talk about is Paradise Rot by Jenny Cavell. This one is a teeny tiny little one. If you're wanting something that is like a little easy afternoon read, this is a great one to pick up. This is super introspective, super weird, a book that you will never quite know what's going on. I would liken this book to when you like cook a lobster in a pot of water, it's like by the time the lobster realizes that it's boiling, it's too late. And this is that, but with weirdness. This book starts quite normal, and by the end of it, you're like, what the fuck did I just read? So this book talks about our main character Jo, who has just moved to England to start university. She moves in with her strange housemate Carol, and they sort of begin a, I wouldn't say relationship, like an obsession with each other. It's kind of like a will they won't they vibe throughout the whole book. You're wondering if they are going to end up together. This book, as I mentioned, starts normal and just unravels at the end. You're like what is happening? What is going on? It's a book about sexual awakening, and I loved the way the author uses the metaphor of like ripening and rotting fruit to kind of represent the sexual awakening of a woman and discovering a new aspect of her sexuality that she didn't know was there before. It's dark, it's gross, it's grimy, it's like wet. The author does a really, really fantastic visceral job of describing rotting food and rotting fruit and like mold and mushrooms and moisture and fungi, and it all kind of comes together at the end of the book in this like cacophony of beautiful disgustingness. Also, there is a shocking amount of piss mentioned in this book. The amount of time, if I have $1 for every time a character pisses or mentions we in this book, I'd be a very rich woman. Truly the definition of go piss girl in a book form. The next book I want to talk about is Greta and Valdin by Rebecca K. Riley. This is a book set in Aotearoa, which is the indigenous name for New Zealand. Don't come at me for my pronunciation. I can't roll my R's, okay? It makes saying certain words very hard. I love how this examines the intersection between your queer and cultural / racial identity. It's about our two main protagonists, Greta and Valdin, who come from a very large, very funny mixed family. They are part Russian, part Maori, and part Catalonian, and their family is this huge noisy cacophony of like love and noise and mess. Greta and Valdin are adult siblings who live together and are basically trying to navigate life. Valdin is dealing with the fallout of being dumped, as well as making some political statements on television that he's kind of been raked over the coals for. Greta is nursing an unrequited crush from one of her co-workers who treats her like garbage. This is an absolutely stunning book about platonic love and familial love and romantic love, and how families come in all different shapes and sizes, and a family doesn't necessarily always look like the nuclear family that we see in so many pieces of media. I think it's rare that books examine queer family, and as I mentioned before, I think a lot of the time when it is talking about the relationship between someone who's queer and their family, it's often that kind of like, I've been kicked out trauma porn. I loved the fact that Greta and Valdin's family accept them wholeheartedly for who they are, and the story of their family is more so kind of like a funny side plot. I saw someone describe this book as like a gay Schitt's Creek set in New Zealand, and I just think that's so accurate. This is a fantastic, beautiful, funny, sharp story about love and family and the different shapes and sizes that comes in. Next we have Son of Sin by Omer Sekar. This is an Australian book, a debut novel by a poet, and I never hear people talking about this book, and it is so beautiful. This tells the story of Jamal, who is a young queer Muslim boy growing up in Western Sydney. It talks about what it is to be queer and to be Muslim, and how those two things interact and clash with one another. I think, again, like Greta and Valdin, it also talks about love in so many different ways, both like platonic, familial, romantic. I love, and I love books that examine how love comes into your life in different ways and the different phases of our life that we encounter love. As I mentioned, the author is a poet, and that so clearly shows and shines through his writing. The way the author describes kind of like basic things like a sunset is just like breathtakingly beautiful. Like, some of the quotes in this book should be framed and put in the Louvre. I think this is an absolutely stunning meditation on identity and finding your identity, and how hard it is as a queer person to find your footing in a world when so many people take that for granted, and especially at a time when you are a young adult right on the cusp of being like a full-grown adult and being expected to know who you are when you really don't have a clue of who that actually is. Also, from like a personal perspective, I think it's such a novelty for me to have books that are set in Sydney, a city that I have lived in for so many years. So that was another big plus for me, just getting to like read about parts of Sydney and being like, oh, I know what they're talking about. This is a stunning book, and also the cover, immaculate. 10 out of 10, no notes, read this book. The next one I want to talk about is Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. I'm going to preface my spiel about the book by saying this one was not my favorite. However, I do think that could potentially be because it is young adult, it's written for young adults. It's maybe why I didn't gravitate towards it, because I did find the writing a little basic, but as I mentioned, it's not written for me, it's written for teenagers and young adults. So I think that probably had a lot to do with the reason why I didn't love this. I also think it is so freaking important for young adults and young trans people especially to see themselves represented in media, and for that alone I have to give this book all of the flowers, because as I mentioned, I just think representation for queer young people and young trans people, I imagine that there's not much, it's far and few between. So I just think this book should be talked about to the high heavens just for that alone. So Hell Followed With Us tells the story of our main character Benji, who is a trans boy who has basically been set up to become the destroyer of worlds by the cult that raised him. He's been infected with a disease that is slowly taking over his body, with the intent that the cult is going to use him as a weapon to destroy what is left of this dystopian society. Benji manages to escape the cult and finds a group of ragtag teens who have taken refuge in an old LGBTQIA community center. Then together they sort of try and band together to destroy the cult that has essentially ruined Benji's life. This is an absolutely stunning metaphor for queer platonic love and finding your found family, and using something that has been thrown back at you and spat on by your actual family and turning that around and shining that back on them as a weapon. I think it's a stunning look at what it is to weaponize the things about you that people don't like, and to use that to make yourself and the people around you stronger. I hope that makes sense. I'm not having a great time using my words today. The next two books, unfortunately, my copies have gone walkabout. One of them, again, I have spoken at length, which is Bellies by Nicola Dinan. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I've talked about that book in my videos, I would, again, be a very rich woman. So Bellies tells the story of Tom and Ming, who are two young gay men who meet just outside of university at a party. They fall in love, they move in together, they're starting to plan their life together after they graduate, when Ming realizes that she is actually a woman, and she begins the process of transitioning into her true self. This book, I just love it. There are so many times, you know a book is good when you have to close it and put it down and like take a minute to center yourself over what the author just said, and that happens so many times in this book. The way it talks about relationships, and we always, we often talk about gender and what that means, and so this book really examines what gender means to individual people and what it means to be attracted to a certain gender, and how it's not always just physical attraction, but it's that connection to that person that can mean so much, but also at the same time not necessarily just be enough. This book repeatedly ripped my heart out of my chest and stood on it and set it on fire, and then like sprinkled the ashes over a cake and fed it to me. I wept multiple times in this book, but like in a good way. That sounds like a bad thing, but it's not. This also has a really beautiful take on male friendships, which I think is a topic that we don't often explore in literature. I think so often male friendships are put down to two bros going to the pub together. I loved the fact that the friendship between two of the male characters in this book is so beautiful and deep and emotional, and they love each other so deeply and so fearlessly, even though despite that one of the characters is a cis straight male. I absolutely loved the friendship between Tom and Rob. I can't praise this book enough. Nicola Dinan has done something so special, and I would encourage everyone on the face of planet Earth to read this book. The last book I want to talk about, which I also unfortunately can't find my copy of, is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone. This is again another very short book. You could easily knock this over in like an hour or two. This book is, I'm gonna be so honest, not gonna be for everyone. It's very strange, it's very introspective, it's very short and like prose, almost poetry style. So this tells the story of two women who are kind of on opposing sides of this huge space war that's been taking place over like millennia. They have the ability to like jump through time and through space, and they begin by leaving each other letters that start off as basically taunting each other, being like, haha, you thought you were gonna win, but we figured out your plan. And then slowly those letters of torment turn into friendship, which then turns into love, which then turns into the author writing like the most incredibly stunning poetic love letters that I have ever read in my entire life. These are sort of interspersed with short bits of POV as the characters try and work out where to leave the letters so the other will find it but someone else won't, and then a very confusing like breaking of the space-time continuum towards the end, but like make it gay. The meditation on it's kind of like a contemporary Romeo and Juliet set in space is the best way I could kind of break this down. It's two women who aren't allowed to be together through the sheer luck of being born on the opposite sides of a war, but love conquers all in the end. So those are a couple of my favorite books that center around LGBTQI plus characters or are written by queer authors. I would highly encourage you to check any of these out. I would also love if you have any more suggestions for me to leave them in the comments. I am always looking to broaden the representation that queer and POC authors have on my bookshelf. So please, please, please leave any recommendations that you have. If you are celebrating Mardi Gras this weekend, I hope you have a fantastic and safe time. Take care of each other. Get silly, but not too silly. Be safe. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't leave a mean comment or I will cry. Have a great weekend, have a great week, and I will see you next week. Bye!